and welcome everybody to the next Samwise Yaboinski podcast. So good to be back. Samuel, how are you?
I'm very good, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing really good today. I'm very excited. You've been back after more journeys and traveling up in your abbey with the goats.
Yeah, I went to my favorite archive in the world, which is on a lovely old deconsecrated 12th century abbey in Normandy in the north of France. And my favorite thing about it is that tethered outside of the archive reading room, which actually is an old 12th century chapel, a huge, lovely, beautiful chapel. You walk outside of the reading room into a field, and there's this goat that's tethered up, and he's a lovely, long haired, shaggy goat with two very impressive horns. I have no idea why he's there or who he belongs to. He just is tethered there, and he sits and chews on the cud, and he comes up to you and licks your fingers. And it's like, this is heaven for me. I just love it. I go and spend time in the morning with the archives, and then go and have lunch, and then I go and play with the goat, and then it's back into the archives.
I love it. Well, welcome everybody.
Sorry, that was longer than it needed to be, but whatever.
No, it's perfect. And it's a perfect segue because we have fascinating both. I love Samuel's stories of travel, and of all of us on the staff team travels the most by far and away, but he goes to these amazing beautiful places and then sits in the dark looking at papers. So I can't wait to hear more and more about all of the research in an upcoming podcast coming soon. But today we have a very special guest who has traveled far, far and wide in this beautiful world and has come to be with us and serves you all on the board of trustees right now. We have Anjali. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. And hey, Sam, thanks for having me on. Feel like a minor celebrity here today.
And I have had the great privilege of serving with you now for, gosh, is it three? This is your third year, right?
Yes.
Wow. And it's been a real joy. And I know we can always, everybody serves differently on our boards, and everybody's differently prepared for our boards. We have a lot of really incredible people serving on our board right now. And I always know that you're coming having prepared, digested, and thought about and formulated opinions on what we've created, which is a real joy. Is a real joy to know that you're really invested in the leadership and you really take seriously the commitment that you've made. And it's been a real pleasure to get to work with you. So, but as we do with everybody, want to hear a little bit about sort of the story, how you found First Church, how you found Unitarian Universalism, and we can dig into your origin story a little bit. But yeah, how did you land with us?
How I found Unitarian Universalism, it's maybe I'll begin a little bit by, where I was coming from, and then, we'll explore other aspects of that maybe in a bit. But, as you know, I was born and spent my early years in India. So I was, born to a Hindu family, raised, with sort of Hinduism around me. As India is, fairly secular. We had, friends that were not observant Hindus that were, either Muslim or Christian, and we celebrated their holidays. They celebrated with us, but um, the vast majority of my, life experience was, connected with culturally or, in a religious way with the practice of Hinduism as a religion, as much as, children even care about, what sort of the
Right.
religious aspects of what it is that they're doing. So few just things to point out, one that there isn't actually any traditional religious education, that is imparted, to kids, at least not while I was growing up. I didn't see that, so basically what you know and what you do or believe is just from absorbing and observing, really,
Yeah.
and, I attended Catholic school actually for
What?
12 years. So yeah, believe it or not. So, it's just, it's, it was just a whole kind of an environment of spirituality,
Yeah.
more than sort of religion. So, if we were participating in any sort of rituals or practices, of course the kids were like going through the motions, but then kind of waiting for, so when does this end and when do we get fed, like
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. But so I would say that my understanding, appreciation of Hinduism was very sort of contextual, and atmospheric, more than anything that was coming from within. So it was probably not a surprise that I kind of lost all of it, once I moved to the US. So, I was 21, I came to graduate school. That day-to-day spiritual reminders, were not around me, and it was just very hard to recreate by myself, for myself, whatever I used to see my mother and grandmother and like various aunts and cousins do, because it was just nothing that it was not as meaningful anymore, because
Yeah.
almost it was almost painful, in that it was a reminder of something that was just never going to be the same anyway, so like why even bother? And so I just carried on focusing on living life, making good choices, being a good person, but not really trying to observe any kind of religious
Mm.
practices. Threw myself into what was important here for me, and building my own life. And I think it really wasn't until I first had Anya, that I thought perhaps some of the, blessings at the temple or something that would have been expected of me was important to do for her. And then
Mm.
tried that and then felt how sort of, again, how it was not the same. It just didn't feel the same. It didn't
Yeah.
resonate, and I felt really alone with it. And so by the time Annika was born, it was just not even a question, that was at any part of it was important at all to me. But I still wanted something, still wanted
Yeah.
a place where, we could go as a family, and then there could be communities. So maybe that's the other aspect, that uh, growing up in a culture where everything was in community,
Yeah.
I found life in the US, at least as a young adult, just lacking that community, So when I uh, talked about trying to look for a place, that we would all feel comfortable with, by now, Tony grew up Catholic too, and had loved the Catholic Church. Hell, as I mentioned, I went to Catholic school for 12 years, grew up Hindu, but was not really doing anything. And then you think about, where do we go? Where we feel comfortable. So of course we first walked into St. Joseph's, and I was just like, oh God, I cannot take this anymore. And then we just
Yeah.
walked into a
That's
couple
interesting.
places around town, right? Because it had to be accessible, it had to be close, otherwise we would never make it.
Right.
And we walked into our church, and we just slipped in the back and we sat in the back. I think it was an Easter service, actually,
Wow.
and as you know, that's a challenging one, for you use the grass. So there was just something about it, though, that we went back a little bit later, like not right away, but we went back again, and this time we talked to a few people. Um, I don't know if Jim Staten was here when you started, Chris,
No,
but
but I've heard quite a bit about him.
yeah, so he pulled us into coffee hour and introduced us to a few people. We spoke to a few people, and suddenly, like, I had the realization that here's where community lives in the US. They
Right,
live
right,
in
right.
churches, like, because it wasn't out in the streets the way I was used to.
Yeah.
And so we liked the place, and I probably mentioned to you too that when I had first driven past the church, it was the June barbecue, end of year
Mm.
barbecue, and it just
Yeah,
looked
yeah,
like
yeah.
such a fun event, and I was thinking, this is so nice, I want to be there. So that's how we ended up like going in to check out the church too. So
Wow.
um it was, yeah, we just kept going a couple more times, and then, it just felt like it was a place. And I think you've heard it from a lot of people. You think you're going just for your kids, right? But then
Right.
you realize you're actually going
Mm.
for yourself as
Mm.
well. So, um, and then when I mentioned that, Tony finally told me that he actually graduated from Harvard Divinity School, right? And I'm like, and I had to find the UU Church by myself, you know. So
You didn't know that
I,
beforehand?
I didn't know that. I just knew that he'd gone to med school, you know, and I just didn't really know that before med school he was at the divinity school for 2 years. So
Mm,
he just said he didn't want to, you know, like put his thumb on any part of the scale. Like he wanted me to choose a place myself because
mm.
he would have been fine. And so, yeah, so
Wow.
that's our
And then
story.
when did you guys meet?
It was 2004. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Well,
Mm.
and where were you? So how far into were you done with grad school already, or?
Yeah, I was. I was done with grad school and postdoc, and had also moved by then to Massachusetts and started working.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I lived up in Andover for a couple of years before moving here
Mm.
to Belmont. So, you know, I was married previously to Anya's dad, and so Anya was 4 at the time when I met Tony. So,
Mm.
yeah, he lived and worked outside Harvard Square in Cambridge, and I worked in Central Square, and yeah, that's where
Mhm,
we met.
mhm.
So,
That's cool. Do you mind if I ask you to say a bit more about the difference between your upbringing in India and here in terms of like the fabric of the community? Because
Mm,
that what you were saying really resonated with me. As a foreigner, in the United States, it there's it can feel very lonely here, and it can feel very hard to connect and
mm.
make friends. And that's one of the things that church here is so important for, right? But could you say
yeah.
a bit more about how you experienced that difference and what it is in India that you really were missing?
Um, if I'm being honest, there were many reasons that I really wanted to leave India, right? So it wasn't
Mm,
it so all of those are still true for me anyway, and then um but coming to the US as a student, was a whole lot easier, I think, than coming as a young adult professional, so at least in
yeah.
school, like there is that student community at least, right? But it was still different from, like that extended family community where, I mean, it's got the good and the bad, right? So like there's I often used to joke about how if you even were like, making mischief out in the on the playground, like, something was happening, like your mother would be waiting for you in the balcony
Mm,
before you got home, because even without telephones, they would know that
Right.
before, you got home, because it
yeah.
was like, so
Yeah.
what happened? So it was like that level of connection, which of course
Yeah.
has it's very annoying parts, but at the same time, there are a lot of people, looking out for you or interested in your affairs.
Hmm.
When you're younger, at least it's very comforting, and you get a little bit older, it's just something that people don't appreciate as much, right? Because you want your own space to be able to make your own choices and decisions that you can't. But
Mm,
Mm.
um, I think the other difference too is there wasn't a lot of space, right, for individual choices, and in sort of fulfilling your own personal aspirations, because there's not a lot of space for personal aspirations. It was a lot about the family's expectations, or the larger society's expectations. So
yeah.
at some point, like, you're always struggling to really figure out, is this really what I want, or is this what is expected of me? And that
Mm,
is
Hmm.
kind of a difficult thing too. But yeah, you're right. But you come here and like none of it is there. So yes, there is the good of not having to answer to so many people, but at the same time, you are alone, and it is pretty
Yeah.
alone. So,
Yeah.
and
That's interesting.
also from a social perspective, like people, things are much more casual, right? People show up at people's homes. You don't have to make an appointment. You don't have to
Yeah.
call ahead. Like,
Yeah.
it's just very, very social that way. And then suddenly you're like, the fact that the doorbell even rings is just like people look at each other like, who could
Hmm.
it be? Like, why does the doorbell
right.
ring here?
Right.
But in India, it rings all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. 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 I wonder too about what you were saying too about the way Hinduism is kind of connected with a whole social context that just didn't translate to the US for you, right? I think that's what you were saying, the way it's woven into the fabric of society is just, you can't reconstruct that in a totally different social context like life in the United States. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe some folk can, right, Sam? Because I mean, I know that there are, folks. I mean, Chris was just talking about family in Atlanta. I mean, I was in Atlanta, right? But I was on the Georgia Tech campus, and I wasn't, out in the suburbs where I know there is by now a large concentration of folks from India and they have their community. And I mean, one of the other things, I had to keep reminding myself was I did not want to be pulled back into some of the same things that I was trying to escape
Yeah.
from, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's
Right, right,
partly
right.
I
difficult.
was keeping that distance, and
Mm,
partly, it was just not going to be easy to recreate it for me by myself.
mm. Yeah, I
Well,
get it.
I think one of the big differences too is when you say like Indian community here, but in India, right, there's so many different communities, and it's
Yeah.
as if saying like I'm gonna go, and it's kind of fun. When I lived in France, it was kind of fun to bump into an American, but if it was an American from Idaho, like we had a very different experience, right? And so
Well, that's
it's
so
like,
so true, and I mean, it's
Mm.
also that's what I was saying about like trying to bring Anya to one of the Hindu temples here, but it's the one in Ashland is, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's very South Indian. It was so unfamiliar to me.
Oh,
Like
right.
I
right.
felt like a
Yeah.
visitor that didn't know what was going on. Not
Mm,
any different from, actually, Chris, you may know a lot more going in there than I would, and I just felt wrong that, why it
mm.
should feel so foreign to me. And yeah, that's never quite connected with that. I do like their food that they have down in the basement.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
Mm.
the food is fantastic. Yeah, and that was what I studied in comparative religion in undergraduate. So we had
Yeah, yeah,
particularly really loved learning about Hinduism. But yeah, is a whole different thing, and I think that's fascinating what you point to Sam, or really both of you. Um, but it's almost like Judaism in that way that Hinduism is just woven into the social framework in a
Yeah.
very different way
Yeah.
than Unitarian Universalism like just is never, like will never be. And I'm fascinated by that because I've been Unitarian Universalist my entire life. And so it's almost been like that for me because it's been what I experienced, it's been the water that I swam through my entire life. But it's really different in that, very few people are culturally Unitarian Universalist. You know what I mean? It just doesn't really exist in the same way that it does in
Mm,
Judaism,
mm.
Hinduism, Catholicism a little bit, but really particularly when it's tied to nation and
Yeah.
personhood, and it's in a
Right.
whole different realm.
yeah,
But
yeah. I was going to say exactly. I mean, you really can't tell where religion ends and culture begins. It's all the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah. 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 Ranganath was telling me a very similar thing about when he was on the membership committee, and we were talking about designing the next journey to membership class, and we were going to have a little class on Unitarian Universalism. And at one point he reflected and said, when I was growing up in India, you learn about religion in the home. And the idea
right,
of going to a class to learn about religion was quite alien. And it
right.
was right. And it's just very interesting, that kind of difference.
Well, and it's to what you were saying before, Anjali, too, about religious education. It just doesn't exist in the way that, oh, check, I'm going to go to the service and drop my kid off downstairs. It's
No,
like, it's
Because
a
it's so
exactly.
much
whole
part of
different,
life, I guess. Yeah, it's
It is
right.
COVID.
part of life, and then when you have those organized like prayer services in your home where the priest or the pandit shows up, right? I mean, and they are reciting everything in Sanskrit when nobody can understand anyway. It's like coming to church and listening to something in Latin, and you have no idea, right, what they're saying or some, and then it's
Mm,
just.
mm,
But that's it. Like you just sit there. If they tell you hold your right hand up this way, you do. If they tell you do this with your left hand, you do. It's just it's not. To me, it didn't resonate. I mean, I knew it
mm,
was sacred and it was holy, and it was meaningful to my family. So I would just like be respectful and do what I was asked. But like it was just
mm.
like, I don't know, don't care, and when does this end and when do I get the dessert? And I
And so you mentioned Georgia, like that's such a big change. how did that, and obviously your family must on some level have been progressive to encourage that, or allow that. Was it encouraged or was it allowed, or how did that leap
Um,
to Georgia happen?
how did the path to Georgia happen? So, um, it was one of those things where I was saying you don't actually know at some point whose aspirations you're living out. So I mean, I was a
Yeah.
good student. I was good in school, but it was to the point where that was expected of me. Like it was. Um, it's a mountain, so you're going to climb it. So, like, you're going to be the top ranking student every single year because that's what you do and that's what's expected of you. And then at some point, you expect it of yourself. And, the truth is the mountains do get higher and higher, right? But you're still like putting all that pressure on yourself because, that's what
Mm.
you do. And I think going, growing up and like getting to high school and starting to get, more appreciation for the system you were dealing with, and how hard it would be, to function in and change that system. Like you just think about what can I do to improve my own lot, right? It would just be I could just be the best at what I do, because that's my one ticket to any kind of freedom as I saw it at the time, which would be the ability to like be safe, be comfortable, be, just able to make some choices for myself. So that's kind of where I was heading, and it just, I realized I was engineer, my dad was an engineer, and I realized I was more
Mm.
interested in science and math, and so that's where I said I wanted to go to engineering school. Well, not a lot of women went to engineering school, and again, if you're going to go to engineering school, well, by golly, you're going to go to the best one, right? And so it was. Extremely difficult. I mean, I think I did almost nothing for 2 years besides study. Like
Oh
for my
wow.
regular school, but then also all the additional studying that I needed to do to actually just clear the entrance examination for
Mm.
some of these top ranked schools, which are extremely difficult to get into. And I don't know the rules anymore, but back then, like you had a qualifying age. So like you could take the test once or twice, but then you would age out of the system. So you couldn't
Oh
even
wow,
try,
really?
What?
and the
Really?
competition was just
Mm.
so crazy, so
Wow.
I mean, we're talking just a handful of people being able to get in, out of hundreds and thousands. I mean, it was just
Wow.
extremely hard. Um, I remember this episode when, like my parents would sometimes drag me out of my room and say, "You have to go out for a walk. Like this is crazy. What are you doing?" And so you go out for a walk, and then they would say, "Oh, I've heard of you." Or like even some stranger on the street, like I've heard of you. Like, aren't you the person who's supposed to top in your school? And be like, send me, take me back home. I can't be walking. Like I need to be studying. And then
Wow.
another time, this woman like walked up and yelled at me because she heard that I was taking the engineering entrance exam, right? So she was like, "You're stealing my son's seat," And I was
Oh
like, "But
Wow.
you're
really?
like, I'm not doing anything to your son,"
Yeah.
So
Right.
just, it was just,
Wow.
because nobody thinks that you're gonna do anything, with your life,
Wow.
and you've got, your life mapped out by
Mm.
societal expectations, and I was
Yeah.
like, okay, like we're all just taking the exam. If your son's good,
Yeah.
he's gonna get in. Like, what's the issue here?
Wow.
Was there a gender element to that? That you were a girl and
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah.
mean, this continued actually. This continued probably. The last time I had such a like overt, reaction from somebody was when I was a graduate student, presenting a poster at like American Society of Hematology or something, and this Indian doctor, came up and wanted to discuss my research, and of course, with great enthusiasm, I was telling him about my research, and then he was like, "So tell me again, what's the point of all this? Like, you're gonna finish this, you're gonna go get married. So what's going on here?" And I was just like,
Mm.
"I'm
Wow.
sorry, you don't know me, you don't know nothing about me. Like, why in the
Mm-mm.
world?"
Oh
So
wow.
it was just I never went to a conference after that where they would have like event, cocktail or reception for scientists of Indian origin, I would never
Oh, wow.
go because I'd be
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, I don't think so. So because it's not like they're being supportive or anything, it was just, yeah, nothing I wanted to do.
Is that something you now, where you are you looking for opportunities to do that for other
Others,
women coming up?
oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all of this in the last many years, it's just been sort of realizing that, it's my opportunity to be able to turn around and give back, right? So, I mean, I'm signed up as a mentor in many, many settings, and like I almost never turn down an informational interview request, from anybody, just so if they want to discuss, what my work is like, or what
Yeah,
the choices that led me to it or anything, I'm very happy to talk about that to see if it can be helpful to anyone who's thinking about a path in industry, right? Because it's I don't know that much about academia or
right.
academic careers, but a lot of people in academia are looking for options too. And so, like, I'd
mm,
speak to postdocs or grad students, or yeah, definitely women or other students of color for sure.
mm. That's good. Good for you.
And in the course of, now generationally, have you seen this sort of shift with your own girls and how their kind of outlook, and how's that been as a mom of
Yeah,
now
for
young
sure. With
women?
my daughters, I would say um, I never tried to raise them the same way I was raised, so I always made sure that their opinions were heard and respected. Um, I didn't try to force them into, a cultural box because, if it wasn't even resonating with me by then, how would I actually,
Right.
you know, impart that to them? So we were like, we're just going to find our own way, and
Yeah.
so um, they've both always been freely, able to express their opinions, and I think, and make their own choices, including ones that I was less familiar with, but I was supportive anyway, because I'm like, and like my older daughter, she did a couple of beauty pageants, and I was like, what do I know
Mm.
Oh,
about that?
wow.
But I was like, sure, I'm gonna support you, and and now Annika, of course, is in theater, and again, um, not anything I spent a lot of time doing, but very happy to support her. So. Um,
Yeah.
I think because they are 8 years apart, it's also
Mm.
possible to see the changing times in my own family, so um, probably my extended family would tell you, I'm very different, today than um, I was decades ago. But for me, my older daughter is already, way different from me than I was at her age. And then I see my younger one who's even, as times have changed and their ability to articulate their own um, expectations, what they demand, from life and from society. It's very easy to see that, in my younger daughter too, where, she's like, couldn't care less about being so much of a people pleaser, even though, nobody wants any, everyone has probably a need to be liked, but, like she's just very quick to call people out on, what she thinks is not okay, or,
Mm.
and they are, and I like, actually the fact that they can say it, because I'm sure that many, many times, like, we kind of I taught myself, like probably a lot of women my generation would say that, we taught ourselves to just like, overlook a lot of things, even though we
Right.
notice, but
Yeah.
increasingly just hearing my kids is giving me the words actually to say things that I felt all along, but I didn't quite even know how to express it, right? So
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, and as a, temporarily able-bodied, probably no longer young, middle-aged man in power, I'm really aware of trying over and over again to make space for and really kind of ruthlessly check in with how we're making space for everyone in our processes and in our, it's challenging. It's challenging
Mm.
to really make sure that everybody is being heard and welcomed, that leadership's being nurtured, and
Yeah, no, it's so true. I mean, I wonder how you think, the church continues to evolve, with um, more younger families and young women, from generations younger than I am, and with their own set of expectations. How how do you see us evolving?
yeah, it's a great question. I think that the church is a fascinating example because on some level we've been doing church the same as we have for hundreds of years, meaning that the power structures, we have a board, we have bylaws, we have all of these things that are grounded in the same sort of structures of power. We have nominating committees that choose from pools of people that they know, and so it's a discipline to both nurture emerging leaders and continually grow the systems through which we lead and through which we support one another. So we're always learning and always trying to grow how we're doing what we're doing. And like most human institutions, we're going to fall short and we're going to get better. And I think we're really lucky at First Church because we have a really strong leadership and we have a really wonderful staff team right now, and we together are collaborative and connected in a way that I think makes a whole lot of growth possible and makes a whole lot of reflection and, again, intentionality in our leadership possible, where so many places are worried about keeping the lights on and keeping the staff paid. And so we're in a different moment, and still there's a lot more that we can do, and being able to be open to learning and changing and growing. And again, just as for myself, that's partly why I have annual reviews, partly why have the committee on ministry constantly asking the congregation how we're doing, because we all, I'm 46 years old and I want to keep doing this for another 20 years and get better and better and better and serve more wisely of the whole time. And so I know that means that there's stuff that I'm not doing yet that I will start doing. And so I think
Mm.
that's a shared intention with, almost all of our leadership that I've talked to. Everyone really wants to be in it to learn and grow. It gets uncomfortable when it actually, when the rubber hits the road and we have to really look at hard things, but
Mm.
I think we're ready. And that's part of who we are. It's like culturally, I think we're used to thinking that we have this identity of being progressive and sort of on the cutting edge and really trying to be, liberal and bringing people in and really cultivating a space where everybody can lead and grow into their fullness. And, that's not always the case. So we have to,
Yeah.
do better.
I mean, certainly, church has not necessarily felt, an uncomfortable place to me ever. But I mean, just going back to looking at today's work environments, and uh, you kind of always left questioning, how many of the statements that they're issuing or anything, like how much of it is real or how much of it is because that's what's expected in this day and
Mm.
age. And if you don't do it, then you're going to pay the price. But like you really look in and you say, are those choices really what you would do if you wanted to be inclusive, or
Mm.
are we very quickly just put a new face on an ad campaign and think that they are done? Is that so?
Yeah.
My kids call it performative, so it's
Right.
just
Yeah.
Yeah.
trying to understand behind that, is how much of it is genuine. And it's interesting. I always feel like if I have to ask, whether it's real, then if it doesn't feel, then it doesn't feel real. And then it probably isn't, so it's
Mm. Mm.
kind of struggling with that a little bit too, because also um, for people expecting, some sort of very quick accolades because they made, some small changes. Many of us are there thinking, yeah, it's going to take a little bit more, to right some of that hurt. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, well, that's wonderful. And so now that you've been at the church for a little while, again, I mentioned at the beginning, I think one of, certainly the first way that I've really experienced you in great depth is through your leadership. And I know at the same time, I don't know if you're still on the board at Powers, but I know you've been also serving on the board of Powers. And so obviously you're a committed leader and you bring a lot to the table in that leadership. And I've been wondering about leadership right now and wondering about this sort of, not this next generation, kind of this next generation, but I wonder about leadership and people's commitment, and it's kind of woven in the last conversation too, because I think some of it, from a from a how we structure the leadership, I think is partially needs to be reimagined. And I wonder, I for me, just committed, I'm a ruthless volunteerer because I rely on so many volunteers that anytime
Yeah.
the Girl Scouts that Leah's in, or this robotics thing that my older son is in, anytime people reach out and they ask for support, I make a spiritual practice of saying yes if I can, because I rely on so many other people saying yes at the church. And I don't know if that's as much of a common practice right now. And I wonder if you've sort of reflected on that and what you think, both kind of what you think makes for solid, effective, and helpful leadership, and how you think we can cultivate that in people.
Yeah. Interesting to hear sort of, why we volunteer. I mean, I would say that uh, I started doing a lot of volunteer work for schools, when my kids were younger, because it's a way to stay connected to their life, but then also have them see that, where they go to school is important to you, and, you want it to be, you, a good place. And so I would always look for things that, I could either do from home, or I could, it was more a defined time period in which, and like I would do the holiday gift drive or something,
Right.
I've been in school for years that, Annika was there. I was doing the holiday gift drive just because then, it's a defined period
Right.
of time, because I mean, I have always worked full time. And for me, full time is not 40 hours. It's like 40 hours would be a very, very light week, so it's
Right.
a big challenge to keep up with all of that and do some volunteer work. So, uh, when they move on, right, to be older, and there's really honestly less to do, once they go off to high school and stuff. It's just, now I could be like theater sales, ticket sales mom or something, but other than that,
Yeah.
and at church, right, we were doing similarly all the activities that the kids were involved in. So, whether it's teaching RE, or, helping Alpha with the musical and doing whatever was assigned, but after a while, like, you get to a point where, I just had this, um, not sudden, but like, gradual realization that, I just felt at a place in life where, I was just so filled with gratitude for what I had, and I just felt like, I just needed to do more, to give back more, to be more deeply connected, so, of course, I had to jump right into stewardship at church, right?
Right.
Like, let's, but
We're glad
I
you
think
did.
it
Yeah.
it's almost like the more you do, the more you're connected. There were so many
Right.
Yeah.
aspects. And despite being, like an active church member and a regular attendee, like, I don't think I really understood the workings of the church until I
No.
joined the stewardship committee. Like, there was just
Yeah.
no comparison, right, for the experience before and after that time. So certainly you get, something, a deeper understanding, but, hopefully you can also contribute, with your efforts. I would say, having spent my entire life, in sort of the corporate world where, results are important and like, impact is important. And for me
Mhm.
personally, um, I've made so many choices that, have been difficult, right? And pushed myself so much. So I always look at the so what of,
Yeah.
anything I'm involved in, because it's
Yeah.
just like, if it doesn't make a difference, then why bother, And so
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's just
Yeah.
been, for me, what drives me a lot, right? So it was just after after doing the stewardship work for 3 years, then it was just for me like a welcome opportunity to then join the parish board,
Yeah.
because
Mhm.
now
Mhm.
when you say prepared, I mean, I would say I don't think I had a good understanding until I did the stewardship work for 3 years, so then you come in with a whole different perspective, thinking in a different way. And yeah, similarly at Powers, like I'm not a musician, the way many others on the board are, but, hopefully you're still bringing a perspective, from
Yeah.
just a governance standpoint, an advisory standpoint, more so as a musician, so
Yeah.
um, I do
That's a
appreciate.
fascinating point. The so what I think that's one of the things that we, sometimes when we're recruiting people in any capacity, we almost downplay. We're like, oh, it's not going to take a lot. Oh, it's going to be easy. Oh, don't worry about it. It's not going to. And I think the so what is almost more important. It's like, you know what? If this, if I want to invite you to serve in this way, and here's what it's going to do. Like, here's the point. We're going to be raising money through the stewardship process, and here's what that makes possible. And without it, and so being able to lean into the importance because that's really, motivating in it. And it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
this is why we're asking you.
it's very consistent. I mean, I feel like my work life and other life is all very consistent because you were asking about leadership. Now, let's say the same thing is true at work. I mean, um, in various teams, there may be team members that may not have visibility to the whole big picture, but it's important that each one gets to see how their portion of the work contributes to the big picture. Otherwise, how do you motivate people? And so,
Yeah.
Right.
um, it's not it's not been important to me to be visible. It's been more important to me to have impact, and so
Yeah.
Mm.
I think that and that you can't do that, and you can't achieve whatever it is that you're trying to do in my world, by yourself, and you need the whole team. So, if it requires, I mean, I have high standards for myself, and everyone can see me putting just as much, if not more work, and so it's not as if I'm just like pushing the work on to others. I mean, they can see I'm working hard on it myself, and I'm expecting them to deliver what they need to deliver by a certain time so that next person can take it from there, So it's all laid out, and everybody understands what they are responsible for and what they're accountable for. And then it just works out. I mean, I don't know. It's not like a thoughtful strategy or anything, but I think that maybe maybe it's my background, or it's like everyone's a somebody, right? I mean, I spent some many many situations in which like you wonder, whether you're even visible, and
Yeah.
so
Mhm.
I would never like turn around and treat anyone as if they were invisible, so it's
Mhm.
uh, maybe that there is a level of empathy, there is a level, like I don't have any need to treat anyone as less than, because it's
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
not going to give me anything, or any kind of satisfaction. And so it's just, um, I mean, you read these in the motivational things, right? Like, you're not judged by how you interact with the CEO, but how you interact with the janitor, right? But I mean,
Right.
I
Mhm.
feel very comfortable chatting with like everyone, and so it's just connecting, right, with
Right.
people and being
Mhm.
able to explain. because you are asking them to do a lot. Everyone's making sacrifices, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
want to be sure that they are visible and that they are feeling that they are part of making impact right alongside you. So
Right. Well, and so as we have with everybody, we also wanted to have some time. If you had any questions for Samuel or for me, please
Yeah.
yeah, I
feel
mean,
free.
I'm always, every time I see you in church or I listen to you in anything that you talk about, how do you keep going? I mean, where do you find, this renewal, this energy? Because, we're mostly all feeling kind of drained when we wander in there on Sunday, right? So
Mm.
that's the time when you're like at your best. How are you doing
Yeah,
there?
yeah, yeah. He is. He is at his best in worship, and I wonder how he preserves his like emotional energy for that too. How do you do it, Chris?
Well, I'm very much fed by people. And so I was, so I think that moment, I really love connecting with everybody. And so Sundays especially are very, that whole experience is just, some of my favorite
Mm.
time. Um, but it's also sort of preparing for that. It's been a real education to figure out what feeds me. And there's a singer called Dow, and she has this band called Dow and the Get Down, Stay Down. But anyway, she has this one lyric that says, "I drink only that which makes me thirsty."
Mm.
And that has just always resonated with me. And I'm like, I just am mindful of the things that truly feed me, nourish me, replenish me. And a lot of that is fishing, time in nature, this sweet time with my children, a time off adventuring with my wife. And so I'm really careful to be sure that I'm doing those things. And the pandemic really drove home. It's not like, oh, if I can make it work, it's like I have to.
Mm.
I
Mm.
really I get to a point where I just need to be up to my waist in a river rushing around me at a certain point, or just put it all down for a little while and take off to the mountains or the
Yeah.
woods or whatever. So I'm you know committed to that, and to spiritual practice too,
Hmm.
sitting meditation and vespers. I mean, a lot of what we do together, the worship that we've created really feeds me. Also, the music that we create on a regular basis really feeds me also. So that's what's been, very, very replenishing. And the so what, like it's 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 a beautiful thing that you all were creating a long time before I came, and that now we get to create together and continue on. And so it feels really important to me what we're doing, and so that also feeds me, just knowing how what
Mm.
we're doing has been helpful to people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um,
Well, actually, Chris, if you don't mind, can I ask you? I've been meaning to ask you this for a while. When you're training to be a minister, right? At any point in the training, whether it's at dip school or later, is there training on like how to protect yourself emotionally, how to protect your emotional space, how to protect your emotional resilience, how to protect your kind of bandwidth so that you can be there for people when they need you, and also look after yourself? Is that part of it? Is there like some training on that?
there is. I took a class called the Psychology and Theology of Religious Leadership, and
Mm.
so I learned from this wonderful Rosemary Kenichi. She's a Catholic nun, just a genius, really, really super wise about religion and leadership and ministry. But really, I think the biggest place we learn that is in internships and in
Okay.
the clinical pastoral education when you're working in a hospital, being a chaplain,
Mm.
because then it's really like, I was called in. I mean, everybody has these stories, but I was called in one night, and I was on call middle of the night, and I was called in. This huge family. It was actually right around Thanksgiving. Huge family had gathered, two branches of the family. Young couple had a baby, and the mother was estranged. She was an addict. She got clean. She came back. She was trying to rebuild connection. She was watching the baby, a toddler, and it launched itself off the table, hurt its head,
Mm.
and the baby had died. And the family didn't know yet.
Mm.
And the doctor tells me, and he's like, so can you go pray with them?
Mm.
We're going to come out in about an hour and tell this like 30 people. We're about to tell this huge family that the baby's dead. And so I go out, and the family gathers around, and they ask me to pray with them. Right. And that's how you learn about
Wow.
how to,
Wow.
yeah, you're just thrust into
Yeah.
these situations.
Oh my goodness.
And it's really different when you're
Yeah.
in a community for many years, and hopefully many, many, many more years, and you're building these long relationships. We just had the Day of Remembrance service, and I was going through pictures. We had those Polaroids that we took when I first came during candidating.
Yeah.
I had hundreds of them still in my office, and I was sharing them with John so we can learn people's names. And I came up on, Laura Miller's picture,
Mm.
and I came up on, Penny's picture,
Yeah.
and, Rebecca Hankey's picture and Jim Sugarman's picture. And so I just looked at them all, and, I had relationships. Obviously you all had longer relationships, but still I knew these people. And then I brought their pictures out and put them on the altar. So it's different when you're in a place for a long time and you get to know people and build relationships with them, because then you're invested, then it's like personal in a different way once
Yeah,
you're
it becomes
in a
personal.
place, and you've built the resiliency, and you've built the connection, you built that love over time. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. But I mean, you're part of everyone's life, right? So in the congregation, and so it's just by default, you're part of things that are happening to them or things that they're doing. So kind of finding that balance between, being there for people, but then that's sort of one of the things I was talking about too, is sometimes in like, oh, I can't believe such and such person just did this, but I'm still a minister. Figure out a way to bring them back.
Yeah. I remember, over the course of many years, you get to see people, so I have a colleague who talks about that God loves us exactly as we are, but loves us too much to leave us like this.
Mm.
So it's sort of a similar thing to me, where
I like that.
I get to love people exactly where they are, and be really clear about the ways that we all can learn and grow, and really support people in growing from wherever we are. So knowing that, and that's true for me too, right? So this 46-year-old version of me is not the end product, right? And so we'll all continue to keep learning and growing, and there's a lot of grace. And I think it's the harder thing is when there's genuine harm done, or when there's genuine, evil's too big of a word, but when there's like malicious intent, that gets complicated. But where it's the vast majority of times where it's somebody just falling short of the person that they want to be, there's a lot of compassion and a lot of love in my heart for that, and that we can all grow around together and get better and better. So.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things we used to talk about when thinking about stewardship, right? We used to say, well, the relationship with church isn't transactional, so it's not
Right.
as if, you're okay, I'm drinking coffee every Sunday, and so, what do I owe the church? It's not that, and so
Right.
kind of thinking about that deeper relationship that you have with the institution, and together everyone has with the institution, so with the community. So yeah, it's so totally different, right, from my day-to-day work that I mean, maybe not totally different, but it's just uh, I guess if I really sit down and think about you know working with teams that essentially are purpose built for everything that we do, which is somewhat time limited. And, it's just immediately establishing credibility with that team, getting this thing done, and everyone goes their ways, and we start all over again with a new team. It's, um, I am probably seeing a few commonalities more than it being completely different, but certainly like
Mm.
your so what is a lot bigger sometimes, than our so what. But yeah, maybe, someday what I'm working on will save lives or something. But yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, and the fun thing is there's a lot of different so what's all at play all at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, and it's also, not everything, is going to be successful. Like, I mean, I work in drug development. Most things are going to be failures, but that's why it's really important to, know that you're doing it with the right intention and you're making the best decisions that you can in the moment with the information that you have. And, that's why, like, it needs to be fulfilling to everybody. Otherwise, they're not getting their so what either.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
But thank you guys. I mean, honestly, this whole time, I know everyone's been telling you this, but I'll say it again too. Just keeping everyone together, and especially now that we're all sort of coming back in person and sort
Yeah.
of realizing that how together folks had been, even though it's still very special to come back in person. To know that it was still there. It was just
Yeah.
never that far away, and it was still there, even though like the virtual thing was not working for me lately. But still, yeah.
Yeah. No, it was a joy to be able to do, and I'm so glad that we're back and coming
Yeah,
back in person
Me
and
too.
seeing
I really needed
people
that. Yeah.
see each other again. And
yeah.
Yeah.
But I
yeah,
mean, you guys were like, I don't know how naturally it came to you. It certainly looked and felt very natural and real, right? But you were the right people, for this time. So thank you.
yeah, yeah.
Definitely we had the right minister for the job during COVID.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, all of it. I mean,
And the
you,
staff.
especially everybody else, learned. I mean, I did my thing, right? But I mean, we're on a podcast that you learned how to do because of all this.
Oh yeah, I learned a lot of new
Like
stuff. I'm just saying that yeah. Yeah. No, okay.
yeah, no, we're all.
Yeah, we
It's
still
been
needed a
really.
fearless leader, right? So yeah,
That's right. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
And thank you so much. This has been super fun, and I'm so glad that you said yes, and so glad to have you, and so
Yeah,
glad
thank you,
to
Anjali. This has been fascinating, and
get
it's
to
your
build
life
this
story is
all with you.
fascinating. It was
Yeah,
fascinating getting to know you better.
yeah,
yeah. No,
it'll be
thank you.
fun.
I appreciate that. It's interesting. So I used to tell Tony at some point, if you list like a series of categories, does that mean you know the person? And I firmly believe you don't. I mean, I think
Right.
so. Yes, I'm an immigrant, and yes, I'm a woman, and yes, I'm a person of color, and yes, I'm a scientist, and yes, I'm a business person. But does that together like tell
Right.
you who you are? You absolutely don't.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
really make any assumptions about anyone based on all of those categories.
Right. No, it's wonderful. Well, thank you, and as always, thank you, Samuel. Super fun, and